Welcome to the Building Efficiency Resources podcast, the BERcast. And on today's episode, the dog days of summer, and wrapping things up with kind of a fun, feel-good episode, just talking about this whole HERS industry, about what it takes to be a successful energy rater, and perhaps in a marketplace that doesn't necessarily really lean into energy policy or sustainability as a norm. We have three veterans of the HERS industry on today. We've got the greatest of all time, the GOAT of Michigan, Matt Rosendaul, fresh out of retirement. We've tried to call him back in a couple times and say, hey, Matt, we need you still. And he said, nope, sorry, y'all.
Sure, who?
I'm tending to my garden. And so that's not going to happen. Then we got Jeremy Field, Agent 07. We've got the original BER QAD in the house, my good buddy from down south in Athens, Georgia way. Now been off on his own as an independent rater with BER for a good over a decade. Jeremy, good to see you again, buddy.
Likewise, good to see you too, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Good deal. How the dogs doing this year?
A little sluggish on the start. We'll find out tomorrow how real they are in Knoxville. So hopefully that'll go a lot smoother than the first couple. But it's been a good couple years, so I'm not going to complain about much.
Fair enough. Sparty is 2-0 thus far, and so we'll take it. Not necessarily dramatic competition yet, but we'll take it. We didn't lose to a MAC team. We'll count that as a win. And then we've got Corey DePenning with Redfox Inspections. Corey has been one of our longest tenured as well as one of the more prolific home energy raters that we've had operating under BER's umbrella now for good over a decade. And so Corey, thanks. This is your first time on the BERcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Are you a Cyclones guy?
I am a Cyclones guy.
Okay, there you go. Those Cyclones, they're looking all right, right?
Yeah, we'll see what happens. We're going down to Arkansas this week, so it shouldn't be. I'm hoping there won't be any problems.
Yeah, we ditched the three-prong segment approach, so we're not just rapping about football for a whole giant 15, 20-minute block, but we're going to fit it in anyways, regardless. And I'm talking college football because after week number 1, I'm not exactly getting that excited about these colors I got on my head, but we'll see what happens. I'll tell you what, this is week number 2. We better go get them, because if we lose to Ben Johnson, who just went over the Bears, man, I'm gonna be burning my silver and blue here, because Lions did not look very good. So, Corey, does that make you a Pack guy? I know over there it's either your Chiefs or your Pack or your Vikings. Or
yeah,
your Bears.
Mostly Chiefs, but I grew up a Houston Oilers fan.
Okay, all right. Anyways, moving ahead with the actual game here, what are we talking on the BERcast? We're not just talking about football. We're talking about the new normal of the HERS industry. As you all who may have been frequent listeners over the past year, there's a change in leadership at a federal level, and energy efficiency is not as federally being invested in terms of things like tax credits, and perhaps even from a sort of a motivating the market through other financial incentives or mandates. I think it's a little bit premature to be calling off all of these things. I think some of our fears about Energy Star just entirely evaporating may not actually manifest. Talking to the folks from the EPA, they don't know yet whether or not it's going to be around or it's not. But we're having to prepare at BER and prepare our raters for the potentiality that some of our North Star, as it is from a federal level, may not be here at some point in the future. Some of the extrinsic motivations for doing ratings, like tax credits, those are going to be harder to come by. The 45L tax credit, we can definitely say that is going away as of the end of June. Now look, the wind blows in both directions, and we may continue to go from one crazy end of the spectrum to another in this country from a federal level. But regardless, I have to admit, I'm very enthusiastic about the future of energy efficiency. And the reason why is I think there's an opportunity for it to do what it was always meant to do. which is deliver on its promises to consumers of maintaining their household income through more moderate energy bills, as well as potentially providing a better quality of life through more comfortable, less drafty homes that hopefully promote better air quality and just a better sense of living. Wouldn't that be great if our homes were almost guaranteed to be moderate in terms of their utilities? Everybody's got utility bills. That's okay. But wouldn't it be better if they were more like our cell phone bills? We at least knew what we were getting ourselves into and we could plan on it versus, boy, you could get the same house in the same location, both across the street, both 2,000 square foot, 3 bedrooms, and one of them could have hundreds of dollars of bills in utilities per month, and the other one could potentially be $100 or less. Wouldn't it be better if we get to that point where we could sell itself on its own merits without necessarily a lot of the noise of doing it for the financial incentives? Obviously, it's part of what I think launched our industry, and we're going to talk to these gentlemen because I've got these 3 guys on here because each of them grew up in not the easiest markets to sell this stuff. Matt, I'm from Michigan too, and I call you the GOAT of Michigan because in terms of HERS raters, an independent rater who really planted their flag in a market that probably could care less in a lot of ways about energy stuff, you really went out there and you put the HERS industry in Michigan on your back and you carried that banner for a good decade plus. And we got you on here and I want to hear your perspective. Jeremy, you're down south there in Georgia. And again, Georgia, not exactly the type of business climate where energy policy is necessarily super lucrative per se, or it's not like don't get me wrong. Obviously in Atlanta, there's more of a motivation nowadays for sustainability and energy stuff. But I think broadly in the state, it's been a tougher sell having worked down there myself. Now y'all have pretty high energy bills from what I understand. And so maybe there's an opportunity down there. And then Corey, finally, you're in the state that the thing about Iowa that people don't realize is that it's not all one or the other. It's a rich mix of pretty well educated, like public school, kind of union environment, as well as business center, business friendly type of more conservative environment. It's more of a mixed state, but still I wouldn't say it's one that necessarily is certainly not screaming hot liberal like something out east or out west. And so that's the reason why we have you out there, because even if you are on the coasts where this stuff sells itself more easily, I think in the reality is what I found is it don't matter if you're in Portland or if you're in Des Moines. The builders are the builders. They just want to know what they're going to get out of it and what you're going to be able to provide from them. The consumers still don't entirely get this stuff, so we have to sell this stuff on our own merits. Matt, maybe you haven't been doing this maybe the longest. I would say, when did you get in the HERS industry? Something like 2007?
2006. I got my certification March, something like that, 2006. Signed my first provider contract in April of 2006. And at that time, there were no tax credits, there were no rebates. Energy Star was just Energy Star. We still had 5-star HERS rating, and then they flipped things, and then they came out with the thermal bypass checklist and all that stuff later. But yeah, there were no incentives. And so I built my business based on being a quality assurance person for the builders. I wanted to get under their skin so that they couldn't imagine building a house without having me come and test it. Because the basis of what we do is finding things wrong with houses. And the purpose of incentives, whether it's tax credits or utility rebates, anything like that, is market transformation. That's the ultimate goal, is coming up with those incentives to help get the industry over the hump until it can be self-supporting. And so at the time, I always told my builders, hey, if you get tax credits, if you get rebates, I'll do everything I can to get them for you, but don't get hooked on them because they may not be available, or the house may not actually meet the requirements to get it. And sure enough, over the last 15 years, the tax credit has come and gone and been retroactive, and there's been rebate programs come and gone. And I always just focused on quality. And so one of my advice to raters is always to be the expert that the experts call. I still get code officials from Michigan that call me and say, hey, I've got this guy who's trying to put this plan set through that I don't think it passed. Can you take a look? And it's flattering to have code officials call me, builders that are not even my customers, other raters, other people in the industry that call me. And that's where you want to be. You want to make yourself indispensable and be the expert that the experts call. And that boils down to being a lifelong learner. And most of the raters that I've run into in the industry, especially on the BER roster, are lifelong learners. We love to dig into this stuff and figure it out. And when you can be that resource for the builder is fantastic. And like here's another example of something that people raters can do for their business for the builders is to do free callbacks. And I'm sure you do that, Corey and Jeremy. I'm sure a lot of raters do, but maybe you don't think about it and should vocalize that to your builders to say, hey, after a house is done and the people are still in their warranty period and they're going through their 30-day, their 60-day, maybe their 6-month and 12-month warranty inspections from the builder's warranty department, if there's a problem with a house, I want them to call me. If it has to do with performance, if it's condensation, it's something hot and cold, if a hot room, cold room, anything like that, a funny smell, I want them to call me first. I want the builder to call me, and I'm going to come back and look at the house for nothing and help them point the finger so that instead of throwing darts at the problem for that cold room that's over the garage, they'll just call the HVAC guy and have him come out and put another duct run in. But the problem might be the knee walls. Problem might be something else. And so I want them to call me first. And that's where you can start to be that resource for the builder that when somebody calls, when your competitor calls the builder and says, hey, I'll do your HERS ratings for $325, the builder can say, I don't care how cheap you are, we've got a guy and he's great at it and we've got a relationship and it works. So yeah, you want to be that expert, help the builders out. Don't try to make $1 on every single phone call and every single site visit. You make it up in the end by doing a lot of work that doesn't pay.
Jeremy, probably you cut your teeth in this industry right around at the same time that I did down there in Atlanta, getting trained at Southface Energy Institute when I was an intern. I think, Jeremy, you passed through one of the classes where I was probably helping to carry the blower door and get things set up. So going back to 2009, 2010 era, you spent a lot of time with the weatherization program for a period of some years, but I get the impression that you've focused more on the affordable housing niche here in the last decade. I don't know, tell us about your experience in a market like Georgia where energy policy isn't necessarily all that exciting to policymakers, maybe not super emphasized by the utility in terms of lucrative incentives. Here it is, though. Now y'all, with that Vogel plant down there, have pretty high energy bills, from what I understand. Are you seeing a shift over time? Tell us a little bit about your kind of history.
Yeah, and I'm actually looking forward to the BER podcast about the 2009-2010 Southface intern house. I think that would be that would fill up at least a couple of episodes there. But yeah, we go back to actually doing the field testing on that intern house with you and Uriah there and Mike Barsick and all that, the good group in Atlanta. Yeah, the Vogel thing is interesting. Georgia Power bankrupt Westinghouse doing that. There's a lot of talk about, you can read all the stuff that's going on in that in the news, but essentially I think they've frozen our rates for 3 years, and then after that we don't know what's going to go on, but for the most part we've got pretty dirt cheap energy bills in Georgia. Don't tell a lot of the folks that we worked with in the weatherization program that there's a lot of people that do struggle to meet bills in a very small house, and our rates are really low. So we've got a lot of work that needs to be done here. There've been those programs. I got a HERS rater certification, and at a time where nobody was building any new homes. It was the desert of new home building. And so trying to sell somebody on a HERS rating when they're not even building homes was next to impossible. So most of the HERS rating industry in the state of Georgia has been all around the low-income housing tax credit work, which was going on pretty hot and heavy at that time. But there's a lot of pressure trying to get into that. And I ended up in the weatherization monitoring with the University of Georgia, and mostly thanks to Chris. He mentioned they were starting to hire And so back to his original point is that we've gone through ebbs and flows in this country where 15 years ago, we're not going to date it, Chris, we said that they were pumping a whole lot of money into our industry in the existing home size. And when I say a whole lot of money, it was a lot of money that was going into the weatherization program. And then that kind of turned around, and now here we are again. And I guess, a recession of energy incentives out there. It's been interesting working in the existing homes program, then rolled into working with guys like Matt and working with Corey in Iowa and a lot of people in the New England area in the Northwest. It gave me a lot of really good perspective on what's going on elsewhere and be able to try to incentivize that here in Georgia. But it's an uphill battle just because we do have a fairly mild climate, even though it does seem we're more of a cooling society down here, but it's definitely more mild compared to the harsh winter days, as we were discussing before we started recording in Iowa. But no, it's been interesting, and hopefully won't see a huge increase in the rates here, but nothing is going down here recently, so it'll be interesting to see how things progress.
Yeah, and then Corey, I think you got started in the industry probably just about at the same time, but in a different part of the country there in Iowa. I venture to imagine, what did you go through? KBSI for training originally?
No, I did the Accurator network.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Charlotte Reed, long-term hers trainer there in the Kansas City market. So Corey, you got certified probably 2010, something like that?
2010.
Yeah.
And then the big start for us was all the utility companies in our market had some type of incentive if you did. Back then it was Energy Star 1.5. It was one or two. It was one of the two Energy Stars where it was just one simple page to fill out.
Version 2, of the program where we had the thermal bypass checklist. You had to get 85 tight ducts, but other than that, not a whole lot of requirements for sure.
No, it's not a lot of requirement, but they got, if I remember right, it was back 2010, they got $750 starting off with, and then I think it went up to $2,500 a house for quite a while.
So you started off, and it was a pretty lucrative market to say, hey, builder, like, it doesn't make sense for you to not do this. Energy Star is not a super big lift. But then shortly thereafter, you get started in 2010, and then the EPA says, wait, we're changing everything. We're going to version 3 of the program. And version 3, it maybe to our listeners seems very passe at this point. Heck, we're in version 3.3, and we've got next gen, and it's a lot more sophisticated and higher performance at this time. But the reality is, going back to that transition between Energy Star version 2 and version 3, now you had 5 checklists. And the HVAC contractor had to be certified, and the builder, and the rater. And then shortly thereafter, Corey, forgive me if I'm wrong, the governor and sort of the politicos there in Iowa pulled the plug on all of these residential energy efficiency programs. Am I correct?
Yeah, it was about, I was just trying to look at my computer. I think it was maybe 2018, 2019. There was a requirement that all utility companies had to reinvest. I think it was 0.5% of volume or something back into energy efficiency rebates. And they basically wrote that out. So these builders went from getting a $2,000 to $3,000 rebate on every house to nothing. Or maybe it was like $250. It was very minimal. That process dropped out pretty much overnight, but the cities were much more entrenched in doing. I've only been on 2 code cycles in the state of Iowa, and that's the 2009, and then now we're on the 2012. And we've been on the 2012 since 2014-15 timeframe. And so we have not changed since then. But most of the cities that are pretty much make a requirement that you have to have an energy compliance done on your home. You get out in the outskirts areas, I think the counties just don't enforce it. But overall, any city, I'd say over 15, 20,000 people across the state, most of them require some type of energy compliance done. It is written in the code that you're supposed to no matter what, but there's a lot of houses being built in Iowa that don't have anything done.
Okay, so you switched from a marketplace of incentives to more of a mandates driven market. So I guess you've been able to have still your reason for being, but it's people would you'd be surprised. I think most people again who don't know a lot about Iowa, maybe some of our listeners don't know the difference between Iowa or Idaho, but the reality is Iowa builds a fair number of homes and historically has had pretty decent participation with HERS raters and third party verification of energy codes because of, I think, that history of some incentives early in the process. Like I say, they built a fair amount of homes there in Iowa. In a competitive marketplace, what was the big sort of competitive advantage that Redfox was able to bring to the table there? And now you're in a couple of other markets as well, like Kansas City and Grand Rapids, Michigan. So if you had to pass something on to our listeners, when there's change and maybe the sugar rush is gone, how do you make that differentiating factor to keep the lights on? And really, I'd say in a lot of ways for you, you were able to grow in spite of those incentives being gone. And that's what I want to hit on is like, how do you build your business in an environment where you don't necessarily have free money floating around?
We consider ourselves what I want to call the builder's HERS rater in our area. I'm not forcing them to do, if they want to build to a 30 HERS score or they want to build to what the minimum is, we're going to support them in that process. So that's how we look at things. Of course, I'm all for energy efficiency. There is benefits to majority of it. I know we're running into issues down in Kansas City where we're seeing paybacks of 30, 50, 100 years on some of these efficiency things that they're pushing out that some instances it doesn't make sense. But for us, I'm where we're just listening to the builder to say, hey, are you guys still, are you going after the 2x4 market in your area, or do you want to go more high end to the more high efficiency 2x6 market? Because we have mixtures of everything. Are you building a $300,000 house or are you building the $1 million house? And we're going to work with you on what you're wanting, but we're still going to make sure we're following the rules to make sure you're passing code no matter what. So we document, like I said, since 2010, I have every house I've ever done. I have all the documentation. I have the pictures of every house we do. We make sure that I always tell my guys in a court of law, if we have to sit down and we have to show what we've done, we're making sure we're meeting the letter of the law in all regards. But at the same time, if the builder just wants to get by and do exactly just to get by, we're going to work with them on that. And if someone wants to do high end, we'll work with you as well. So that's how we've grown our business to be what they're wanting versus what I feel personally or what maybe a politician says. Because every builder, doesn't matter if I'm in Western Michigan or Kansas City or Iowa, not everyone can afford a $500,000 or $1 million home. And there's got to be builders in all realms of that. At the same time, I also want to make it efficient enough where their homeowners also not getting what I want to call screwed out of what's required. So that's how we've grown a lot of our business, and we're continually growing in each one of our markets. Like we were just saying,
common sense to me, and I think that sort of eludes people sometimes. Maybe get started in this industry and you're philosophically motivated. A lot of people get into it for that reason. I'm going to raise my hand. I got my start as an intern at Southface Energy Institute, and I wanted to focus on green building and sustainability, and I still care about that stuff for sure. Almost 20 years getting close to it, into this whole thing. I still think we need to be focusing more on better, but it's hard to get better until you do good. And some people want to jump all the way to best when we're not even at good. And it sounds like, Corey, from what you're saying is you're willing to work with people on better or best, but if they're willing to just do good, which is compliance and do it right, and here it is, there's a more of an emphasis on third-party verification of codes there in Iowa. That's like where you were able to like make the sale. Am I right?
Oh yeah, I'd rather have them do something with a HERS rater than do nothing at all. Because I strongly feel, and I'll tell all my builders, that having us come out and verify a house at installation inspection and final to make sure they have less callbacks. And builders realize that, because every once in a while we'll have a builder call us and say, hey, we did a house down in southern Iowa and we didn't use you, and now I got problems. We're like, there's not much we can do after the fact. But then I also have builders that realize that, and we travel all over the state of Iowa. We have one builder that's now going into Omaha, and we're following with them to Omaha. And I think just a HERS rater just makes builders get compliance. You still have a lot of human interaction with the installation company. And there's a lot of things that get missed, but there's a lot of things that don't get missed. There's not very many inspections, I'm sure everyone can agree with, that we don't find something small, or in some cases they forgot to cap above a closet, or who knows what, a chase or something. And all that stuff adds up at the end, and that's when the homeowners have problems. So we have a lot less phone calls back on houses that what I consider builders when they're using us versus not using us, and most of them know our weight. That's why they're not going to other places when someone's offering $350.
Yeah, and I just think that's such a critical point, because I think that some people, if they're reading the statistics of housing starts, people might be getting a little bit shaky in the knees and thinking, oh, now it's the time I got to really tighten my belt and lower my prices. And I've always felt like that's a foolish way to go and do your business ever. You have to know your value and create that value so that it's sustainable. Not sustainable in terms of the natural environment, but sustainable in terms of your business being able to survive headwinds. Because look, I'm going to go ahead and assume that today's headwinds are like any other in the past, that they come and then they eventually give way to new opportunities for prosperity. And I still think there's a tremendous amount of prosperity going on right now. But regardless, the whole thing is, I've heard from all three of these gentlemen that the way that they cut their teeth was to know the market, differentiate, and then really set yourself apart by being more of an advocate for the client at the end of the day, so that they'll want to call you back for years to come, irrespective of what's going on. And I just think that is so critical, because here in Detroit, I don't get involved in a whole lot of direct consulting work, but every once in a while I get brought into something. And switching to war stories, there's an affordable housing developer that called me in order to do a program. We didn't have a lot of raters here in Detroit at the time under BER, and so I agreed to take it on. And man, big mistake. It took 5 years for the project to even get started. But I'll say war story for the rest of our listeners is always date your contracts and put in potentially the ability to adjust your rates later on if it drags out. Because man, the dollars back then maybe seemed good, but then with inflation and just the pain of it dragging on, think about it that way. Here it is. We got a cold climate. It's Detroit. They were pumping in supply side ventilation, and the mechanical contractors didn't insulate the incoming fresh air ducts, and they were not flex duct. They were hard pipe metal duct. And thankfully the GC was a little bit more building science minded, because he got it right away about what the problem was. And the problem is, for those who may not totally get it, is you're pumping in a ton of moisture in a brand new building. Think about the tens of thousands of gallons of paint that's going into a brand new apartment building, and the concrete that's still curing, and the wood that's still curing, and the drywall mud that's still curing. You've got all these things that are creating moisture in a brand new building. And so these buildings, they're going to run more moist to start. That's just the reality of the circumstance. And then you've got these potentially extremely cold, uninsulated ducts running in a ceiling cavity that's going to be enclosed in drywall. So I pointed that out, and unfortunately I didn't even have the weight of the Energy Star program, which was one of the programs they had to meet to point to, because the Energy Star doesn't say that you have to insulate fresh air ducts coming into the home, which is, I think, a programmatic void. Assuming the program sticks around, they should probably fix that at some point. But the risk was tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to drywall right as affordable housing tenants are moving in. And that was just a simple thing. It wasn't even really an energy thing as much, but it was something that I could go into my bag of tricks. And I built credibility with them, because I stood my ground and said, no, you have to do this. Even though I don't have a program to lean on, I'm not going to certify your project. And guess what? They've continued to call me as a local building science expert. I may not necessarily rate all their projects because I got other HERS raters in the market to do that, but building that credibility, it can be difficult. Jeremy, like you said, affordable housing is the big sort of reason to exist in the HERS market largely, and it's a competitive market there in Georgia for this. How do you balance being the expert versus they want somebody to get it done necessarily? How have you carved out that niche?
I've actually come from a general contractor's background. That was my education, and then I did commercial work for a while. So I had a mindset going into, once I started being the third-party verifier, I don't like to use the term inspector, but that's what I am. So I went in with that mindset in that regard, and you have to come in in my younger days when I didn't have all the experience, you had to listen to the experts, the people that have been teaching and had been experiencing the war stories as we're talking about here. And you had to lean on that expertise. Then as you got further into getting more knowledge, more experience in the buildings themselves and seeing and hearing what your clients are telling you, that you have to make it very adamant that if you don't do certain things, you are going to have these problems. And I do have a builder on the coast, and maybe they're just not telling me that they're having any issues, but exhaust-only ventilation strategies in Georgia are becoming a real nuisance and a real problem with the tighter infiltration levels that we even had at the code, which is not as tight as it should be, but needless to say that we are seeing a tremendous amount of first and second year problems with the specific things that Chris mentioned. Is that construction materials are very moist. According to our builders, we're building homes too tight. We all know that story, is that we're not building them too tight. We're not mitigating the issues with humidity. So just knowing that we're having those issues, sharing not just the nerdy HERS rater or the nerdy building scientist aspects, is, hey, your so-and-so client over in the other part of the state did this very specific thing, and they're having those millions of dollars in issues that nobody wants. There's not a aha, I told you so moment. It's, damn, that sucks. We need to help them in the future. And then now, just as to get into, we are the building science geeks here, that we're starting to see most low-income housing apartments are either installing or pre-wiring for dehumidifiers. So an in-wall dehumidifier is going in, definitely in the terrace levels where it's even more difficult to get moisture out, but certainly at least pre-wiring for all these things. And some developers have just said, no, we're going to put these in. If nothing else, it costs a lot less to dehumidify all those constructions. It's not necessarily that they're building incorrectly or they're doing something wrong. It's just we got a lot of things going on. There's a lot of moisture. We've had a couple summers here that have been really wet, and it depends on how your schedule works out when it comes to getting a roof on and pouring concrete and all that stuff. So we're seeing a lot of that, and just really leaning on knowledge and expertise. There's so much information out there that we can read that is specific, that is good, whereas the internet as a whole can be a black hole of misinformation and sending people down the wrong direction early on when you don't have the experience is certainly a hard thing to avoid. But as the war stories come through, and we just know that things are going to happen, and you can always lead the horse to the trough, but you can't make him drink it.
Yeah, so common sense approaches to utilizing our higher skills of rational built environment strategies, letting builders make the choice. Obviously, it's a allowable choice to put exhaust only ventilation, even down in coastal Georgia where it's extremely hot and humid. It's not what I would recommend, but it's allowable, and here it is. I'm sure that you've passed on that message. To Corey's point, sometimes you got to let people do their own thing before they come back to do the right thing. Corey, switching back to you again, what's one of these? You heard my war story and you heard one of Matt's war stories here. What's one of the big successes you think that Redfox has had with meeting a builder where they're at, but really showing them this is why you do it this way, in terms of potentially a building science blooper or something else you've seen out there in the field as a war story?
No, I don't have a lot of horror stories out of Des Moines, except for just recently in the last couple of years, we've been getting into more LIHTC projects out of the Des Moines market and traveling to these places, and the GC basically saying, oh, hey, we're ready for you. And you get there, and we went this last week. We flew 800 miles to a project, and half the units didn't even have air handlers in them when they're telling you, hey, they're ready. So we're learning that a little bit, especially when we're starting to travel a lot more now, that what's your definition of ready versus our definition of ready. We think ready is like someone's ready to move in tomorrow. And their ready was, hey, I got my paint's still wet, but hey, we can get in there and get your stuff done. So we're learning that way a little bit on the LIHTC side. I don't have tons out of Iowa. I guess the biggest heartaches we're having is in the Kansas City metro, where we have a new code, the 21 code that Kansas City, Missouri is adopted. But then you have all the surrounding communities around them do different HERS scores, ranging from 60, I'd say 70 to an 85 HERS score. And now all of a sudden, all these cities are going from a higher HERS score, and they're jumping both feet into the 24 code unamended. So the biggest things we're having right now is teaching the builders, what is that going to mean when you had a HERS score of 85 in this town and now you're doing a 24 unamended? And how are you going to get there? And what is it going to take? And it's more, the horror story is more on our end, just having the availability of the time of everyone getting through the modeling phases of changing of the guard a lot is of all these cities are just all over the place. In Iowa, we have 2012 IECC. In Kansas City, I have 21 code. I have the 18 code. Missouri, the other parts of Missouri is a free for all of anything. And then you have Johnson County, which is the majority, a lot of growth in Kansas City, where you got 20 towns and you have 20 different HERS score requirements. And now they're looking at doing 24 code unamended. And then some of them are doing that. Some are doing HERS scores. And they're, of course, asking between the HBA, the cities, the builders, they're all asking us, oh, hey, model this house to see what we need to do to pass. And cities are like, hey, what's your opinion on a good HERS score? That's open to interpretation, and then doesn't, whether you're building a $300,000 house or a $3 million house, that means a lot. That HERS score means a big difference.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think what I'm hearing from you is, to a certain extent, your home market that you got your feet wet with. When you jumped into this industry around the 2009 IECC, hey, the 2009, I think a lot of us benefited from states moving to that because it had mandatory testing for duct leakage, at least, and then recommended testing for blower door. And if you used those two tools, you could then trade off certain building enclosure elements in a performance methodology using section R405 of the code in order to basically give builders more flexibility in compliance. Then Iowa moved to the 2012, but it was amended, so it wasn't quite as aggressive. There was still a little bit of meat on the bone for them to be able to do some meaningful trade-offs, such as having 2x4 walls without continuous insulation. And again, we may say, again, I'm a passive house guy. I think robust building enclosures are great, but I also understand if you're a builder that's used to doing something a certain way and your plan sets are built a certain way, you're working with a key group of tradespeople, sometimes it's less the cost than it's the existential risk of changing how you're doing business. Iowa's been stable, and then you're saying in Kansas City market, it's all over the place. You've got HERS scores similar to what we had back in the good old days of version 2 of Energy Star. And then you're moving to the 2024 IECC, which For those who haven't really started to dig into that, we just had our last episode of the BERcast talking about the 2024. I'm actually preparing a presentation I'll be giving the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance Energy Codes Conference in Milwaukee next week about the third-party verifier role in the 2024. And all I can say is there's paths to success with the 2024, but there's no free lunches. And I don't know, Corey, if you would agree with that. So if you're a builder going from an 85 HERS score and now you're going to the 2024, there's no free lunches. There can be trade-offs, but if you don't spend money in one place, you're going to spend it in another. So
the key we're finding in a lot of that is the ERV is definitely key to have.
Yeah, which, you know what, I will just say that as much as I'm a big advocate of better building enclosures, I think the more that I've gone in my life in this industry, I would trade off more insulation for a tighter home with good ventilation, because that's what really matters, I think, to people's health ultimately. Yeah, a house could be incrementally more comfortable with more insulation and more resilient. And yes, we'll use less energy, especially with these Canadian wildfires going on here, even in Michigan. We've been dealing with foul air. I would rather have an airtight home with good ventilation than just more and more insulation on the walls. So I'm glad that you're hip to that. And I agree with you, Corey, that is one of the major paths to success when you're going to the 2021 or 2024 codes, both in the ERI as well as in the R405 performance methodology, is you need a tight home and you need good ventilation. And if you do that, then the builder has more flexibility. Jeremy, what do you think? A war story, buddy? You got one for us here?
Just a real war story is just trying to get builders to, I don't even know who's going to watch this, but just building to code, for crying out loud. They don't even want to do that. And so that's why we've been focusing mostly on the tax credit world, where fortunately or unfortunately, they're forced to use a green building program. And for the most part, all the green building programs require the HERS score or a performance path meeting some kind of target index. But yeah, man, it's just really frustrating I think I might have passed along an interesting tidbit from a local builder here who hires us just to do their pre-drywall blower door test, and that's as long as, I think the way the code reads, as long as all the penetrations are completed in the building envelope, you can do the test. And so we've been using the pre-drywall blower door test for the final. But he builds the passive house standards. He chooses not to get any kind of certifications. He does it because that's what he thinks we should be doing, or he knows that's the way we should be building. And then I've heard people basically say that their builder, if they didn't have to put in a window, if by code they didn't need a window in something, they'd basically build a vault, which maybe from an energy standpoint, that'd be great. But yeah, that's the war stories in Georgia, I think, is we're fighting kind of an uphill battle with, especially now that builders have been busier than they ever have been. I think Matt did make the point that we are starting to see just trying to get guys and gals to get to the point of, hey, we need to be doing a little bit better for many reasons. And I think mostly for the things that you mentioned, not necessarily the Canadian wildfires in our area. We've had some things to come through Georgia here recently, along with our just typical mold mildew issues, that we need to be building better for the indoor air quality. We're spending a lot of our time as a society indoors, unfortunately as it is, but we are more focused on, in Georgia, hey, you got to have a lower blower door number, and if your ducts are outside the envelope, they got to meet 6% or whatever it is now, as opposed to, hey, we need to be making sure that ventilation systems, spot ventilation and mechanical ventilation systems are not only present, but they're actually working and doing what they're supposed to be doing. That and just fun testing ducts. That's about all I got for war stories. And as we've talked in the past, Chris, just getting people to install insulation correctly is just, if people used manufacturer's instructions, maybe I wouldn't have a job, or I'd be doing something different. But just doing seemingly what you and others that are probably listening to this just seem to be common sense or common practice. Sometimes it's beating your head against the wall.
So what I'm hearing is, to put a bow on all this and wrap it up into a neat little package to a certain extent, is number one, be flexible and adaptable. Don't put all your eggs in one basket as a business person, because if you get a hole in that basket, then you're going to break all your eggs. And so aside from that, meet the market where it is. If you're in a market if you're a super energy conscious professional, yeah, you can probably carve out a small niche in a less progressive a market, just focusing on ultra high performance. But the reality is you're probably going to have to work with things that are just a little bit middle of the road. And again, I want to stress, and I say this in all elements of life, there's the good, better, best model. And as long as you're doing good, that's okay. Good is good. Meeting code and getting us to the basic levels of performance, even with more older codes or amended codes, that's okay. Obviously, we may continue to strive for the better. And if I'm going to push anybody to strive for the better anywhere, I think we can afford to go into air tightness and better appropriate ventilation as more of a standard of practice. And that's the way to win over these builders, because I actually think there's a way to sell that too. I don't know that the public knows all the time about fresh air. We have more of a health conscious society. People will care more about their sleep, going to the gym, and etc., and eating the right foods. There's more of a trend towards that. Breathing in good air and not having mold and mildew in your house, I think, is a pretty slam dunk sale. There's some really low cost monitoring of devices. I've actually invested in a couple of them. Shout out to Air Gradient and to Air Things. These are very inexpensive air monitoring devices that I don't think they're perfect necessarily, but they tell a big story. And I'll just say for my house, 1927, here in Detroit, when I bought it, not a stitch of insulation, probably had a HERS score of 200 when I got it. I've done a lot of work to it. Brand new windows, insulation all throughout, tighten it up, better mechanicals. I have to invest in ventilation. You know why? Because I have higher CO2 in my bedroom at night. And so I want to get better sleep. So that's going to motivate me. Matt, I'm going to go back to you just as a final wrap here. Again, our elder statesman, he made himself and made his way to retirement on the back of this HERS industry. What do you want to pass on here in the ever-changing business climate of the HERS industry?
One of the things I want to piggyback a little bit on some stuff that Corey was talking about with the code and all the different programs that are out there, and the rebates, and then the rebates went away and all that stuff. And one of the things to remember for raters is that none of this stuff is set in stone. We're not dealing with the 10 commandments that Moses hauled down from the mountain. We're dealing with programs and laws and codes that were written by people. And you, as the expert, can have some input in those things. When I was in Michigan, one of the reasons you called me the GOAT, remember, I was part of the Bureau of Construction Codes. I don't remember what they called that, the Code Compliance Council or whatever it was. I had a lifetime certification for training code officials. I helped write some of the energy legislation that became the 21st Century Energy Plan that Michigan created when Governor Granholm was in office. And I remember giving testimony, putting on my suit and tie, sitting in the Michigan House of Representatives, giving testimony to help support that bill before it became Public Act, I think 295 is what ended up creating all of those utility programs. And getting calls from Consumers Energy and DTE Energy to say, hey, we're going to come up with a rebate program. We need somebody to sit down and help model things, Corey was saying. We need to know what score should we offer this rebate. Should it be a 54, 55, 56, 62? Help show us and give us some input. And I was sitting down with my laptop in those conference rooms with the executives, helping write all that stuff. And all of the raters can do that. I've got a little story I remember from when Michigan adopted the 2015 IECC, I think. So we were on the 2003, then the 2009 came out. There was an injunction against enforcing it. They ended up, the legislature passed a thing overnight that required that they be on the 2009, which was the great benefit to our industry. And that was because there was some stimulus money. Remember 2008 and 9, the housing crash. There was some stimulus money attached to being on the 2009 IECC. So the state legislature, bypassing the Bureau of Construction Codes, said, we want that money. We're on the 2009. And all of a sudden, everybody was like, oh my gosh, now what are we going to do? But I went to the Bureau of Construction Codes meeting because they're required, and I think all the raters should have their pulse on this. They're required in Michigan, as probably most other states, to have a public hearing after a new code is published. So within 60 or 90 days of the IECC coming out with a code, then state has to consider the adoption of it, and they'll ask for public input. I went to that meeting. I filled out a little card, gave it to the speaker so that I could speak. At that meeting, whole room full of people, standing room only. The Bureau of Construction Code said we have 3 people who want to speak. The Home Builders Association actually took a neutral stance. They said, we're not going to fight this one way or another. It's not that much different. We've got things in place. So they took a neutral stance. I spoke up in favor of it, and then there was another business there that spoke up in favor of it. And nobody else, and they had allotted like an hour for this meeting, and it was over in 15 minutes. And the director said, we had allotted, does anybody else wants to speak, come up and speak. Nobody said anything, and he said, all right, we've got 2 people who said that they support it, one that takes a neutral stance. The state's going to move forward with the adoption of the code. Drop the hammer, and the meeting was over. And of course, builders after that were like, oh man, why do we have a new code? Hey, they had this meeting and nobody spoke up in opposition of it. And so I think as raters, we need to be out there putting ourselves as that expert to help write the codes, write the programs, figure all this stuff out, because our industry and our livelihood is driven by us. And if we don't give input, then they're just going to let somebody who doesn't understand things create these programs. I think that's an important thing. I think, and especially if the industry is going to contract a little bit, things are going to slow down. You have time to work on some of that bigger picture stuff. We're planting seeds. We're going to be sowing later. Plant those seeds now. One of the things that I did in my business from the start was to do a lot of existing houses. So I did HERS ratings on existing houses. I did them as energy audits, and sometimes a full HERS rating, whether it was for some energy efficient financing at the time of purchase, working with realtors, something like that. And as things slow down, as the incentives go away and people are looking and saying, oh man, what am I going to do? All of a sudden, Energy Star goes away and the tax credit goes away. There goes half of my business. There are a whole lot more houses already built that need our expertise. And it was never a huge piece of my business, but it was a nice piece of my business. And it's a needed service in the market. And it helps to educate us on what's wrong with houses. And one of the funniest things is how true the old phrase rings that I heard this at one of the ResNet conferences one time. Somebody said, the worst thing you can do for a high performance house is let somebody live in it. And certainly most of the problems that come up in a house are from somebody living in it. But sometimes it's something else.
Corey, final piece of wisdom for anybody listening out there?
Oh, I just go along with all you guys said. I just be supportive of your builders, like Jeremy and Matt said. I always think a rated home is better than a non-rated home. So even if we can get something out of it, like you said, Chris, before, whether it's the 2015, 12, whatever you're on, 24 code, having a rated home is better than no rated home.
Amen. Jeremy, final wisdom here from you, buddy?
Yeah, I had the exact opposite experience that we had a code subcommittee meeting for energy in Georgia. There were attended at least 4 sessions, and where we were discussing. So yes, anytime there's a code update, anytime there's any kind of opportunity to, I don't want to say influence, but just talk to people, just see what's going on, why they do what they do, and just say, hey, look, there might be a different way. There might not be a perfect way to do something, but let's work together. Let's lean. Builders have been doing, a lot of builders, they've been building a long time. I had an old boss that told me you don't need to teach a framer how to swing a hammer, but maybe you can teach them what a ladder T-wall is or something like that. I think there's ways that we can work with each other a little bit better in all facets of life, but certainly in the building industry is a good representation of a lot of stuff.
And last but not least is, I'm going to go back to something that Matt said is from the very beginning is, again, differentiate and realize for every new house that's built and sold, whether it's good times or average times, there's 3 or 4 existing homes that are sold, and they all need something. And whether or not it's something that you are going to make a big part of your business, or if it's just something that you're using for your own personal knowledge, it can end up helping you become a better professional in the long run, because you actually have an idea about how homes truly fail. And here it is. We're looking out for everybody here on the BERcast. We want homeowners and consumers to get ahead. We want builders to get ahead. And of course, we want HERS raters to get ahead in this world. I thank my 3 guests very much for joining us here on another episode of the BERcast. And we'll be looking forward to another one here soon. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you on the next one.